Solomon Carter Fuller, African American and Liberian neurologist and psychiatrist. Born 1872, died 1953. The first prominent black psychiatrist in American history, Solomon Carter Fuller made significant contributions to scientific knowledge of the degenerative brain condition known as Alzheimer's disease. Fuller postulated that the disease was not caused by arteriosclerosis or hardening of the arteries. His theory will later be confirmed by other researchers. He was also ahead of his time in his views of the linkage between organic causes and psychological effects, an idea which would come into increasing acceptance within the medical community during the course of the 20th century. One of the first African American physicians to serve on the faculty of a medical school that was not exclusively black, in his case the Boston University School of Medicine, Fuller enjoyed a 54-year career as an instructor and professor emeritus. Born on August 11, 1872, in Monrovia, Liberia, Fuller was the son of Solomon Fuller, a coffee planter and government official whose father had been a slave in Virginia. John Lewis Fuller had bought himself out of slavery and moved his family to Liberia, an African nation established in 1847 as a haven for freed American slaves. Fuller's mother, Anna Ursula James, the daughter of a physician-missionary couple, established a local school to teach her son and other children. There, Fuller was educated to the age of 10 when he enrolled in the college preparatory school of Monrovia. Fuller completed his education at the preparatory school when he was 16, and a year later, in 1889, he sailed to the United States. He enrolled in Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina, from which he graduated in 1893. After completing his undergraduate education, Fuller began his medical studies at Long Island College Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, but soon transferred to the Boston University School of Medicine, from which he received his M.D. degree in 1897. Following his graduation, Fuller began his internship at the Westboro State Hospital Pathology Lab in Massachusetts. In 1899, Westboro State appointed him to a position as a pathologist, and he would remain at Westboro State until 1922. Also in 1899, Fuller became a pathology instructor at his alma mater, BUSM. During the next 34 years, he would also teach neurology and psychology, and would progress from instructor to lecturer, associate professor, and ultimately emeritus professor of neurology. His interest in neurology and psychology, the realms in which Fuller would establish his name, emerged only after he attended a lecture by S. Weir Mitchell, a neurologist. Speaking at a meeting of the American Medico-Psychological Association, Mitchell lambasted hospitals in the United States for their failure to conduct serious studies of mental illness, particularly its pathology and psychology. Inspired by Mitchell's call to action, Fuller began his own study of mental patients. In 1900, he enrolled in New York's Carnegie Laboratory, where he studied under several leading psychiatrists. 4 years later, in 1904, Fuller took his psychological studies much further, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, to the University of Munich in Germany. At the university's psychiatric clinic, he studied under professors Emil Kraepelin and Alois Alzheimer, the discoverer of the disease that bears his name. During his stay in Germany in 1905, Fuller had an opportunity to spend an afternoon with Paul Ehrlich, who in 1908 would win the Nobel Prize for his research in immunology. Later, Fuller would credit this encounter as one of the most important in his life. Upon his return to Westboro General and his teaching work at BUSM, Fuller pursued his study of Alzheimer's disease and other neurological phenomena. The year 1909 would prove to be a significant one for him. In that year, he ceased to be a pathology instructor and began teaching neurology at BUSM, commencing a course of work that would continue for the remainder of his career. Also in 1909, he had an opportunity to meet Sigmund Freud when the famous Austrian psychiatrist visited the United States. Fuller was photographed along with Freud and a number of other distinguished members of the psychiatric community during Freud's visit to Clark College in Worcester, Massachusetts. But his encounter with Freud would not be the most significant in Fuller's life during that pivotal year. 1909 also marked his marriage to Vaux Warwick, a sculptor she had studied under Auguste Rodin, the renowned French sculptor. The couple would have 3 children, Solomon Thomas and Perry. In 1913, Fuller became editor of the Westboro State Hospital Papers, a journal with a focus on mental diseases. In it, he published several articles, but his writings on pathology, psychiatry, and neurology also appeared in numerous other publications. During this time, Fuller's interest in Alzheimer's disease continued, and he made perhaps his most significant contribution to the field of medical knowledge. Alzheimer's is a degenerative disease of the brain cells that results in memory loss and impaired thinking, usually in patients over 65 years of age. By the latter part of the 20th century, scientists still had not reached full agreement as to its cause, though researchers postulated a variety of theories, including the possibility that genetic factors were at the root of the disease. At the time of Fuller's work, however, the prevailing belief was that arteriosclerosis, commonly known as hardening of the arteries, caused Alzheimer's. Fuller disagreed and put forth this opinion in the course of diagnosing the 9th documented case of Alzheimer's. But he was not able to support his ideas with research work. That proof would have to wait until 1953, the year he died, when other medical researchers would confirm the lack of any linkage between arteriosclerosis and Alzheimer's. From 1919 to 1921, Fuller taught neuropathology at BUSM, returning to the teaching of neurology in the latter year. His research continued, and he explored the chemical causes of mental disorders, such as schizophrenia and manic depressive psychosis or bipolar disorder. Here again, Fuller was forward-thinking in his attempt to find a link between a physical cause and a psychological effect. Fuller also assisted in the development of the neuropsychiatric unit of the Tuskegee, Alabama Veterans Administration Hospital. At the latter facility, which treated black soldiers, he personally trained a number of doctors who eventually took over the leadership of the unit. Later, during World War II, a number of servicemen would arrive at the hospital showing signs of what appeared to be mental illness, but thanks in part to data Fuller had gathered from the neuropathological research, doctors at the Tuskegee Hospital would be able to diagnose the actual cause of the apparent dementia as syphilis, a venereal disease. During the last 3 decades of his life, Fuller served variously on the neuropathology staffs of Westboro State, Massachusetts Memorial, Framingham Union, and Marlborough General Hospitals in Massachusetts, as well as Allentown State Hospital in Pennsylvania. Although in 1937 Fuller retired from his regular teaching responsibilities to become a professor emeritus, he practiced psychiatry even in his last years. On January 16, 1953, Fuller died at the age of 80. His legacy was manifold. Fuller, the grandson of slaves, had become the first black psychiatrist of note, if not the first black psychiatrist. He had contributed to physicians' knowledge of Alzheimer's, as well as to the understanding of the link between physical causes and psychological states. On a social level, he was one of the first African American instructors in the United States to teach at a medical school other than Howard or Meharry, both institutions with all or mostly black student bodies. In May of 1971, the Black Psychiatrists of America presented Fuller's portrait to the American Psychiatric Association in Washington, D.C. The next year, the Black Psychiatrists, in conjunction with the American Psychiatric Association, established the Solomon Carter Fuller Institute. In October of 1973, BUSM, then commemorating its centennial, held a day-long conference in honor of Fuller's contributions. Also during that time, the BUSM library was presented with a bust of Fuller. Finally, the university renamed its mental health unit the Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller Mental Health Center. Citations are in the description.